One of the issues that has cropped up in Ukraine in recent weeks is the presence, alleged by Ukrainian government officials and military officials, of Chinese, not just North Korean, but Chinese soldiers, something like 180 of them or more, on fighting on behalf of Russia, with Russia, in the Kursk region, which is part of Russia, of course, occupied by Ukraine last year. And some of them have been captured by Ukrainian authorities. Now, whether these are mercenaries who happen to be Chinese, or whether this is part of a government plan, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has dismissed as groundless the accusation by President Zelensky that the country has been supplying not just soldiers, but also weapons to Russia. And the comments made at a regular press conference in Beijing on Friday came a day after the Ukrainian president said that China was supplying these weapons to Russia, including gunpowder and artillery, and the Chinese representatives were involved in the weapons production on Russian territory itself. And China then added, our position has always been clear. We are actively committed to promoting a ceasefire and ending the conflict and encouraging peace talks that last. But it is interesting that there is, we've known for years now that the Chinese were supplying components, electronic components that the Russians can't get on the open market because of sanctions, and some of these components can be used for making weapons. But there seems that the accusation is that they've stepped that up quite significantly. Is it true? And is Zelensky saying this in order to drive a wedge in order to basically kind of reboot the anti-Russia feelings in the US, which of course have been sort of lost in the last few months, people firmly believing that actually Trump has changed sides. So is he using China? Is he using Trump's dislike of China in order to get him to double down on any potential opposition to Russia? I hope I've made that clear. Let's speak to Dr. Natasha Kuhrt, international security expert based at King's College London, whose research focuses often on relations between Russia and China. Natasha, good to have you on the program. So what do you think is going on here?
I do think, as you indicated, that there is a dimension to this whereby Zelensky quite understandably wants to put China in the frame, if you like.
Yeah. Because that he knows that's one way of currying favour with a man who's fallen out of love with him.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's that easy to curry favour with these days for anyone, to be honest. But, it's understandable that he would want to, highlight anything that might possibly, sway Trump and his team.
But is there anything to the accusation of Zelensky?
Well, this is always the problem, verifying these claims, because the Chinese are pretty good at, plausible deniability. And I think it was already last autumn or towards the end of last year, there were allegations of a factory that had been set up by the Russians somewhere in China, possibly in Xinjiang, making drones, but I don't know that was ever 100% confirmed. Right. Again, quite difficult to trace these things.
Because the Biden administration was very clear, wasn't it? If there's any evidence of China colluding with Russia in the war against Ukraine, they will be seen as part of that coalition, that axis of as Bush would once have said, evil. He didn't quite use that word. And that, I haven't heard Trump say anything along those lines. He's not even threatened the Chinese with repercussions if they are seen to be colluding with the Russians.
No, that's right. So
perhaps he hates Volodymyr Zelensky than he hates the Chinese.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he has been less than complimentary about the Ukrainians and about Zelensky. I think he said, I'm not a big fan of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he is currently behaving as if he's a very big fan of Russia. It may also be that he doesn't want to kind of potentially antagonize Russia, if you like, by calling out.
But what's in it for the Chinese for them to collude with the Russians?
For China, the way that they see the war is as a proxy war, essentially, between the West and Russia. And they very much, take that line that Putin has, of course, taken, which is that, this is a response to potential NATO enlargement Ukraine and so on. But they do. At the same time, I think there's a big difference between thinking along those lines and actively wanting to help Russia with the war. So I think they'll do everything they can to stay under the radar.
Yeah. But I think finally I think we often underestimate, don't we, in the West, to what extent China agrees with Russia that this is not just about curtailing NATO, but that the autocrats of the world are being limited by democratic powers, especially in the United States, on a whole number of issues, whether it's woke culture, whether it's nationalism, whether it's internal interference in domestic matters. I mean, the Chinese don't like any kind of interference in their own affairs.
No. Yeah, no, I mean, quite clearly they do very much align around issues of, responsibility to protect human rights, so-called color revolutions, regime change, and so on. And obviously, the security of their own regimes is potentially at stake.
But have the Chinese understood that despite the tariff war, Donald Trump is now part of their gang? I mean, he seems to have more in common with them than he does with his own Democrats.
I was about to make that point when you talked about the anti-woke ideas and circulating and so on. Obviously China and Russia are on the same page in terms of, traditional values and so on and so forth.
Okay, Natasha Kuhrt, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much.